Maxwell Hartford had everything anyone could want: a sprawling mansion, luxury cars, and a bank account that seemed to have no end. He was the definition of success in every way, at least on the outside. At 52, he had built an empire from scratch, a multi-million-dollar tech company that dominated the market. But despite all his wealth and status, Maxwell's life felt hollow. For years, he had poured every ounce of energy into business, believing that money was the answer to every problem. Yet, as the years passed, the joy of winning deals and accumulating wealth began to fade. His family had fallen apart, his marriage ended in a bitter divorce, and he rarely spoke to his children anymore. His friends, if you could call them that, were more interested in his money than his company. Every day felt like the same routine: wake up, check emails, attend meetings, and repeat. The world around him seemed superficial and empty, and Maxwell had no real connections left. His colleagues admired his success, but no one truly knew him, and he had no one to share his life with. He had built an empire but lost his soul in the process. One quiet afternoon, as Maxwell sat in his office overlooking the city, he found himself staring at the walls of his sleek, modern office. It suddenly felt like a prison. He had achieved everything society told him he should want, but none of it had brought him happiness. He had everything, but something was missing. It was then that he remembered something from his childhood: the horses his father used to raise on their family ranch. Back when life had seemed simpler, before the pressures of business consumed him, Maxwell had loved the horses. The memories flooded back, and for the first time in years, he felt a spark of something. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was just a longing to feel alive again. It wasn't long before Maxwell found himself attending a charity event in his hometown, an annual horse race that, over the years, had become a tradition. The event had been a favorite of his father's, and as a child, Maxwell had spent countless hours at the ranch, learning about horses, training, and grooming them. But as he grew older, business took precedence, and the world of horses faded into distant memory. As Maxwell arrived at the event, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The air was different, charged with excitement and nostalgia. He noticed people from his past, familiar faces he hadn't seen in years. But what truly caught his attention was the sight of the racetrack itself: the horses, the jockeys, and the energy in the stands. It reminded him of a time when life was simpler, before the complexities of business and wealth consumed him. Maxwell wandered through the crowd, half-heartedly admiring the horses as they were paraded around for inspection. They were beautiful creatures, sleek, powerful, and graceful, but something about them felt distant. He couldn't help but compare them to the cold, corporate world he had grown accustomed to. It was then that he saw Charlie Cooper. Charlie had been Maxwell's father's most trusted trainer. An older man now, with graying hair and a weathered face, Charlie still carried the same calm demeanor and deep respect for horses that Maxwell remembered. When he saw Maxwell, he broke into a warm smile. "Well, well, if it isn't the prodigal son," Charlie said, his voice a mixture of humor and genuine fondness. Maxwell chuckled, though it felt strange. It had been years since he'd spoken to Charlie, and even longer since he had spent time with the horses. "I've been a little busy with work," Maxwell replied, avoiding eye contact. Charlie nodded, understanding. He'd seen the same thing happen to many of the young men who'd come through the ranch. "I hear you've done well for yourself," he said, glancing at Maxwell's suit. "But you can't take it with you. Horses, well, they teach you things money can't." Maxwell shifted uncomfortably. The words felt like a challenge, as if Charlie was calling him out. He'd spent his life chasing success, but now, standing in front of the racetrack, he felt like something was missing. "I haven't been around much. I'm not sure I even remember how to care for them anymore," Maxwell admitted, his voice low. Charlie gave him a knowing look. "Horses have a way of teaching you what you've forgotten, if you let them." That's when Charlie told him about Thunderstorm, a horse that was nearing the end of his racing career. Thunderstorm was old, worn out, and considered a dead horse by most trainers. But Charlie still believed in him. The horse had spirit, though it had been overlooked by others. He was a long shot, but there was something about him that reminded Charlie of the old days, the days when horses weren't just investments but companions. Maxwell, driven by a sudden urge to feel connected again, asked Charlie about the possibility of racing Thunderstorm in the upcoming charity event. Charlie raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "You want to bet on Thunderstorm?" Maxwell nodded without hesitation, his decision almost instinctive. "I'll bet everything on him. Everything I've got." Charlie studied him for a moment, his gaze lingering with a mix of doubt and curiosity. "You sure about this?" Maxwell met Charlie's eyes, his voice steady. "If I'm going to do this, I'm going all in." In that moment, something inside Maxwell clicked. It wasn't about winning the bet or proving anything to anyone. For the first time in years, he felt alive, like he was reconnecting with a part of himself he'd buried long ago. The horse wasn't just a bet, it was his chance to rediscover purpose. The days following Maxwell's decision to bet everything on Thunderstorm were a whirlwind of activity. The first thing he did was visit the ranch where Charlie kept the aging horse. Thunderstorm stood in the paddock, his once mighty form now a shadow of what it had been in his prime. The horse was thin, with patches of graying fur, and his gait was slower than it had been in the past. Yet, there was still a fire in his eyes, something Maxwell recognized. The horse wasn't done yet. Charlie introduced Maxwell to the routine, and though it was clear the horse was not in the condition he had once been, there was a certain energy in the air. Maxwell, a man accustomed to the fast-paced world of business, felt an unfamiliar sense of calm as he spent his days on the ranch, working with Thunderstorm. The work was grueling and humble, grooming the horse, brushing his coat, and helping Charlie feed him. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was a life that Maxwell had long forgotten. Each morning, Maxwell watched as Charlie guided Thunderstorm through simple exercises, stretching his muscles, walking him through the course, and slowly rebuilding his stamina. The progress was slow, and at times, it seemed hopeless. Thunderstorm's age and injuries were insurmountable obstacles. But Charlie had a quiet confidence that Maxwell found contagious. "It's not about the race," Charlie would say. "It's about the heart. You can't measure that." Maxwell, despite his doubts, began to immerse himself in the training. He spent hours learning the ins and outs of horse care, working closely with Charlie. The more he worked with Thunderstorm, the more he felt a connection to the horse, almost as if their struggles were intertwined. Thunderstorm wasn't just a symbol of his father's legacy or his own lost dreams. The horse became a mirror for Maxwell's own journey of redemption. Maxwell also began to see the truth in Charlie's words about heart. With every small step of progress, Thunderstorm grew stronger. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but the horse began to show signs of life, moving with more energy and spirit than Maxwell had expected. And with each passing day, Maxwell grew more determined. One evening, after a long day of training, Maxwell stood in the barn, watching Thunderstorm graze. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across the ranch. There was a deep silence in the air, the kind that only comes after hard work. Maxwell felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about the business world or his wealth. He was simply present. But that night, Maxwell received a call from his lawyer, who reminded him of the looming race day and the enormous financial risk he had taken. His lawyers were growing more concerned as race day approached. They questioned his sanity, asking why he was betting on a horse that, by all accounts, had no chance of winning. Maxwell ignored the call and put the phone down, deciding not to engage in the cold, calculating logic of his business world. This was no longer about profit or loss. It was about something deeper. In the days leading up to the race, Maxwell became more than just a millionaire betting on a horse. He was becoming someone who cared, not just about the outcome, but about the journey. And Thunderstorm, the dead horse, was teaching him more than any boardroom meeting ever had. The morning of the race was clear and crisp, the kind of perfect day that only came once in a while. The whole town buzzed with excitement as the annual charity event approached. Spectators filled the stands, mingling in their Sunday best, while jockeys and trainers prepared their horses in the paddock. Maxwell stood at the edge of the field, his heart pounding with anticipation, and, if he were honest, a growing sense of dread. He had risked everything on Thunderstorm, and despite all the hard work, doubts still lingered. As Maxwell looked around, he noticed the polished high-end horses paraded by, sleek, strong, and young. Thunderstorm, by contrast, looked like an old warrior, worn by time. His once brilliant coat was now muted with age, and his movements were stiff. Maxwell felt a pang of uncertainty, but he quickly pushed it aside. He wasn't here to win a race in the traditional sense. This was about something deeper. Charlie stood by his side, ever calm, as he adjusted Thunderstorm's saddle and bridle. "He's ready," Charlie said, giving Maxwell a reassuring nod. "You've done everything you can for him." Maxwell wasn't sure he believed that. He had seen Thunderstorm struggle during training, but somehow the horse had pushed through. And now, it was time for the final test. Maxwell's mind raced, but Charlie's steady presence helped ground him. He had placed his trust in Charlie and, more importantly, in Thunderstorm. As Thunderstorm was led to the starting line, Maxwell took a deep breath and surveyed the other horses. The odds were against them. He had bet everything on a horse no one believed in, a horse no one thought could win. The wealthy owners, the trainers, and even the spectators knew the race was between the younger, more powerful horses. Thunderstorm wasn't supposed to be here. He was a symbol of the underdog, the one everyone had written off. But Maxwell had learned something over the past few weeks. Success, he had come to realize, wasn't always about winning. It was about heart, about pushing forward when everything seemed impossible. The starting gun fired, and the horses surged forward. Maxwell stood frozen for a moment, watching Thunderstorm stumble out of the gate. For a split second, he feared the worst. But then, Thunderstorm found his rhythm, galloping with surprising speed. Maxwell's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Was the horse truly going to defy the odds? As the race began, Maxwell's heart raced alongside Thunderstorm's pounding hooves. The sound of the horses thundering around the track was deafening, and for a moment, everything seemed to blur. Thunderstorm, despite his slow start, was gaining ground, but the other horses were faster, younger, and stronger. The crowd's cheers and gasps filled the air, but Maxwell could barely hear them. His eyes were locked on the old horse, his body tense with every stride. Maxwell could feel the weight of his bet pressing down on him. He had put everything, his entire fortune, his reputation, on this one race. But as the horses rounded the first turn, something unexpected began to happen. Thunderstorm, the dead horse, was no longer trailing behind. He was gaining. Not quickly, but steadily, with a rhythm that seemed almost unnatural. Thunderstorm's movements, though not as fluid as the younger horses, were becoming more powerful with each lap. The crowd started murmuring, and Maxwell's pulse quickened. Could it be? The thought flashed through his mind like lightning. Was Thunderstorm actually making a comeback? The impossible was becoming possible. As the second lap began, Maxwell watched in awe as Thunderstorm pushed forward, inch by inch. His legs, once stiff and slow, were now driving him with surprising determination. His breath came heavier, but there was a fire in his eyes, a will to prove everyone wrong. The horse wasn't just running. He was fighting for something more than victory. He was running for redemption, for the chance to show that age and doubt didn't define him. Maxwell's hands gripped the rail, his knuckles white. The other horses, too, were still charging ahead, but Thunderstorm wasn't falling back. It was as if the horse had found something deeper within himself, something Maxwell had felt in his own heart since he returned to the ranch. The race was no longer just a race. It was a battle between belief and doubt, between giving up and pushing through, against all odds. For a moment, Maxwell's eyes met Charlie's. The trainer's face was unreadable, but there was a glimmer of something, a quiet hope, that told Maxwell everything he needed to know. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about proving that heart, spirit, and belief could defy the limitations of age, circumstance, and the expectations of the world. As Thunderstorm surged forward, passing horses that had once seemed invincible, Maxwell couldn't help but feel the tears rise in his eyes. The impossible was unfolding right before him. As the final stretch of the race approached, Thunderstorm's strides grew more powerful, his body moving with an energy no one had expected. The crowd, once skeptical, was now on its feet, shouting in disbelief as the dead horse surged past competitor after competitor. Maxwell's heart hammered in his chest as he watched the horse, this aging warrior, drawing closer to the front. In those final moments, time seemed to slow. Thunderstorm's hooves struck the ground with relentless force, each step a testament to years of untapped potential. With a burst of speed, Thunderstorm moved ahead, neck and neck with the leading horse. Maxwell's breath caught as the finish line neared. Could this really be happening? But then, as if the weight of the race had caught up with him, Thunderstorm's legs faltered. He slowed, his breathing ragged, and just as he passed the other horses, He collapsed to the ground, right at the finish line. For a breathless second, there was silence. Then, the crowd erupted. Thunderstorm had crossed the line first, barely, but the victory felt bittersweet. Maxwell rushed to the horse's side, tears in his eyes. Thunderstorm had given everything. He hadn't just won the race, he had taught Maxwell the greatest lesson of all. In the weeks following the race, Maxwell's life took a turn he never could have anticipated. Thunderstorm's dramatic win, though followed by the horse's collapse, had left a deep mark on the town and on Maxwell himself. It wasn't the victory that had mattered, it was the heart, the courage, and the spirit that had driven the old horse to push past the odds. For the first time in years, Maxwell understood that real success wasn't defined by the size of one's bank account or the recognition of others. It was about something deeper, a connection to purpose and to something greater than oneself. Maxwell returned to the ranch, no longer the arrogant, aloof millionaire who had once disregarded everything for the sake of business. He spent his days working alongside Charlie, caring for Thunderstorm and the other horses, and learning to appreciate the simplicity and peace that came with hard, honest work. The days of endless meetings and meaningless contracts seemed distant now, as if they belonged to another life. The rush of the corporate world, once intoxicating, no longer held any appeal. The town, too, began to see Maxwell in a new light. Where once he was known as the cold, calculating millionaire, he was now someone they could respect, not because of his money, but because of the man he had become. People who had once scoffed at him now greeted him with nods of respect, and many found themselves seeking his advice, not about business, but about life. Maxwell had become a symbol of redemption, of second chances, not just for Thunderstorm, but for himself. In the evenings, Maxwell would often sit by the barn, watching Thunderstorm graze peacefully in the field. The old horse, now retired from racing, had become a legend of sorts. Stories of Thunderstorm's improbable victories spread through the town, and the horse was treated like royalty. Maxwell found a deep, quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had given Thunderstorm the chance to shine, just as the horse had unknowingly given him a chance to rediscover who he was. Though Maxwell never returned to the high-flying world of business, he had found something far more valuable: peace. His relationship with his children, which had been strained for years, began to heal. Slowly, but surely, they started visiting him at the ranch, and the distance between them began to close. One warm evening, as Maxwell stood by the fence watching the sunset, he realized he no longer felt the gnawing emptiness he once did. In the quiet of the ranch, surrounded by the horses, he had found what he had been searching for all along. He didn't need to be a millionaire anymore to feel successful. He had everything he needed in this new life. The greatest prize was not wealth, but the deep, unspoken connection between himself, the horses, and the community he had once left behind. Maxwell had found his redemption, not at the finish line, but in the journey.